The first time the house said my name, it came from behind the nursery wall. Ruth. And the candle slipped from my hand and shook hot wax over my knuckles. There is a kind of terror, my dear, that doesn't scream. It inhales. It pulls everything in. The night, the damp, the years. In that single aching breath, I understood something terrible. The child they told me had died at birth, had learned to speak without me. Hush now, don't startle at the wind. It flutes through the keyhole like a nervous flautist. It has done that since I was 19 and first brought to Whitcomb House as a bride. I know every voice this house makes. The timber sighs when the tide turns. The flue hums when the rain is busy on the east roof. And there is a little knock when a footfall crosses the third stair, one, then two, as if the wood itself is catching a breath. I learnt these sounds the way a mother learns the weather in her child's chest. I didn't expect the house to learn mine. You've come to hear a story that people remind me not to tell. They say it sounds like a ghost story. It is not. It's a story of the living and what we do with the living. It is also a story about theft. He stole my happiness, but I became his haunting. I was young and had a laugh that still comes to me sometimes in my sleep, as if it belongs to someone I was fond of long ago. Edward, my husband, was 35 and broad at the shoulders, a serious man who wore his grief like a good suit. He had inherited Whitcomb House and its obligations the way one inherits winter. I learned his face before I learned his touch. A fine, handsome face that might have been carved by a cautious hand. He had a brother, Lionel, who died before I came, and a sister, Agnes, who lived in a cottage in the village with her violets and her opinions. He had a mother, but she is a dim, thin thing in my memory. A smell of lavender and lemon and a door that opened inward and quickly closed. There was another too. It would be a lesser story if I left him out. Christopher lived 3 houses down from the school where my father taught, and once asked if he might carry my books. That sort of boy, that sort of summer. There is nothing forbidden about love, until someone forbids it. When Edward's proposal arrived, through my father, not to me, my mother's eyes filled with everything we did not have. The house, the security, the way a name can hold you like a stone, holds a boundary. It is not a sin to wish your daughter safe. I thought I could be safe and still be myself. Isn't that what the young think? That we can be 2 people and no one will notice. On our wedding night, Whitcomb House looked like an idea of a house, rather than a home. It stood on the cliff, with its back to the sea, and its face towards the village, which I liked. Houses that face are braver than houses that hide. The hall smelled of old smoke and oranges. A great carved newel post at the foot of the stairs bore a fox with a cunning face and a tail that curled into a question. Mrs. Gray, the housekeeper, was a woman 57 years old and made of reliable fabric. She curtsied as if it hurt a little and took my hand as if it were a piece of good china. "You'll be happy here, Mrs. Whitcomb," she said, and it rang like a wish rather than a promise. I was happy, briefly. There's no shame in saying it. Happiness is a tender thing, and it doesn't like to be looked at directly. Look too hard and it skitters under the furniture. It was there, though, in the way the dust hung in beams of light at 4 in the afternoon, in the way Edward would put his hand at the small of my back when we crossed a threshold, in the way the house's big rooms made me smaller and safer for a while. And then the letters came. I had written to Christopher after the engagement. A foolishness, perhaps. I was honest. I told him I wanted to make my parents proud and my heart quiet. He wrote back with a kindness that felt like forgiveness. "Ruth, we cannot live only for the first feeling," he said. "But we must not forget it either." I kept that letter under the lining of my jewelry box. There were others. A scant few, careful and not careful at all. It wasn't an affair of bodies. You must believe me because it is the truth. It was an affair of the soul, which can be more dangerous when you are married to a man who knows the cost of things. One winter afternoon, rain clinched its fist above us and knocked at the windows as if invited. Edward came into my room with our knocking. He held 3 envelopes I knew by their narrow-mouthed scent of cheap paper. "What is this?" he asked, too soft. "My past," I said, "and my future," insisting on being remembered. He burned them in the study fireplace while I watched. It is a particular cruelty to be made a witness to your own erasure. The house smelled of it, and, for years afterward, whenever I walked past that hearth, the air lifted a little, as if sighing with an old smoke it regretted. Forgive me. My voice runs away when I am near that memory. You asked for my darkest story. Darkness never comes tidy. My dear, before I continue, if this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. Stories are less heavy when we carry them together. I'll tell you another truth. Edward fell to his knees after and laid his forehead against my belly, as if I were a shrine. "We will begin again," he said. "We will begin again, and it shall be only us." He believed it. He needed to. And at that moment, so did I. There is an aching relief in letting someone else draw the map for a while. We did begin again. The beginning arrived in the form of a child. Pregnancy made the house kinder. It is not fancifulness. Places can love you if you let them. Mrs. Gray brought me tea with mint. Agnes, who had looked at me until then as if I were a guest who might stay too long, began to knit. Edward smiled more. Those careful smiles he kept like coins. He would draw chairs out for me and open the window when I said I needed the night air, and his eyes would follow me as if I were difficult to focus on, which I suppose I was. Not all men love their wives. It is a sad piece of knowledge to carry. Edward, in his way, did. The night of the birth, the sea heaved against the cliffs, like a horse trained too long in a small stall. I laboured at the foot of the 4-poster, bed with sheets torn to ribbon, and a woman named Pritchard, taking command as if she had always been here, and I was the one who had entered her story. Not the other way round. Pain came and went like the tide, and I learned the shape of my breath. It was not like in the books. It is never like the books. When the child slipped into the world, I was not a mother yet, not until I heard the sound. There was no sound. Something went white in me. It wasn't surrender. It was an end. I reached the way a body reaches in a dream, where the running is impossible, and then someone set a cool hand on my face. "He did not draw breath, Mrs. Whitcomb," said Mrs. Pritchard, gently and professionally, as if she were telling me the time. They did not let me see him. I asked again in the voice a person uses when she is trying not to frighten a bird. "He is better left with God," Edward said, and his mouth trembled, and I touched it. This brave tremor, and believed it more than I believed the words. He held me all that day and the next as if I had broken into a kind of dust he needed to keep from scattering. He cried into my hair, soundless, "Do you know from where I speak? Have you ever lost the future you were already loving? Tell me, have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart? I'd love to hear your story too." Time tilted. I would wake at the hour when the house is not in any particular mood. 3 in the morning, that's strange nowhere. I would walk to the nursery and find it arranged but unlived in. The wallpaper was little ships in a gentle parade. The cradle sat with its empty mouth open. I'd push the cradle and it would rock, and I would think, foolishly, that motion might invite life. Mrs. Gray would bring me broth and tell me of the year the river froze and the swans walked like haughty old ladies. "You have to choose your aliveness, Mrs. Whitcomb," she said. I told her I would when I could find it. The house began its murmurs then. At first I thought it was grief's parlour tricks. A creak near the nursery door when all was still. A scent, something that wasn't ours. Milk, faint and clean and stale. Once, a lullaby the tune of which I did not know I knew, threaded through the quiet like a silver stitch. I did what people in houses do. I made rules to hold out against what I could not explain. Rule 1. There are drafts, and drafts can smell like things. Rule 2. There are birds in the chimney, and birds can sing at absurd hours. Rule 3. The dead, if he was dead, are not interested in bureaucracy. They don't knock. And then it knocked. Tap. Pause. Tap. A little sound, intimate. Not from the door, but from the wall behind the door, where the wallpaper learned to sail alone without its sea. I stood for a long time with my palm against it. The plaster was cool. Who is there? I asked the body of my grief. Ruth, came the whisper, thin as a thread pulled tight. I told no one. I understand now this was a mistake. Secrets are heavy, and they bend the rafters of a home. The next day I set a small toy on the nursery mantel. An ivory rattle I had secretly bought the week the midwife told me. My belly was high and hopeful. In the morning it was gone. On the 4th day it returned to the mantel, but not where I had left it. Someone, or something, had set it with its little handle, pointing towards the far corner of the room. A small instruction, perhaps, or an invitation. I learned the house like a map you draw without taking your pencil off the paper. There were oddities, a wardrobe in the corridor that never quite accommodated all it should have, a panel in the library that echoed differently when tapped, a space between my wall and the nursery that humoured a fraction of hollow. Agnes came one day with her violets and her opinions, and remarked sharply when she found me, with my ear against the wainscoting. "You must not reduce yourself, Ruth," she said. I told her I was listening to the house. Then listen to me. Whitcomb House keeps secrets, the way other houses keep warmth. That night, when Edward climbed into my bed, I asked for the first time if I might see where the baby was. "Buried in the village," he said. "It is not for you. You must be spared." "Sparing me is not the same as loving me," I said. He sat there, a man in a storm, and picked at the sheet. "Trust me," he said at last, as if it cost him. I remembered his hands on my belly, like a pilgrim at an altar. I nodded. I slept, badly, and dreamed of a fox, with a question-mark tail, walking down the corridor with a man's ring in its mouth. In the days that followed, I saw the child, for a breath only, in the reflection of the nursery window, a face over my shoulder, not in the room, but in the glass, looking back, a small boy with eyes that knew me. When I turned there was no one, but the air was stirred, like something had recently moved through it. I went to Mrs. Gray, because Mrs. Gray was not foolish, and because she had come with the house, like the banister and the bread oven, and the place in the pantry, where the cold light always stood. "What do the walls say to you, Mrs. Gray?" I asked. She set down the bowl of apples she had been washing without looking at me, as if she had been expecting the question since the day I arrived. "They say a family is a set of rooms," she said carefully. "Some we live in, some we only pass through, some we lock, and some we pretend don't exist." "There's a hidden room," I said. She cleaned her hands, one finger at a time. "There are spaces made in old houses for priests and for debts and for wickedness," she said. "I'm not saying Whitcomb House is wicked. I'm saying it is old. Who has the key?" She lifted her head then and met my eyes. "There isn't always a key to what men carry. Sometimes you must use your ear." She dried the apples with a cloth. "Don't do anything today. You can't undo tomorrow, Mrs. Whitcomb." That night, the house stood so still. The silence had a texture, like velvet. At 2 in the morning, I heard it. A soft movement in the nursery that wasn't wind or wish. I lit a candle and went. The flame did its own small bravery. It shook and kept going. The wallpaper boats rode more urgently by firelight. There, in the far corner, where the rattle had been pointing the day before, was a hairline crack in the panel that would not have been noticed in daylight. I set the candle down. I breathed. There's a thrill in pushing against a world that insists it has given you all it has to give. I pressed the edge with my thumb. It gave, just a little, and the house inhaled. "Don't," said a voice behind me, and I turned as if made of fragile materials, prepared to be shouted into being careful. Edward stood in the doorway, his face undone. He looked at the candle, at my hand, at the panel. For the first time since I knew him, he looked frightened of me. "You keep secrets," I said. He swallowed, which is not a word, but an event. "To keep you safe, to keep yourself in charge of the map," I said. "What is behind this wall?" "Nothing you have a use for," he said, and this is a line that might as well be written across the crown of the earth. I saw in that moment the boy he had been, standing at the edge of something he did not know how to love without breaking. I nearly forgave him then. It's a strange thing, what nearly happens to our hearts. His hand moved in a gesture I'd come to recognize, an attempt to close something tender. He went to step towards me and stopped, as if there were a border I had drawn around myself, and he respected it, out of fear more than love. "Come back to bed," he said. "The house is not fair to you, Ruth." "The house is the only thing that is fair," I said, and meant it. He left me there. He left me there because he believed I would obey, and because he knew I didn't. Nowhere to press. He left me there because leaving is an old habit, and sometimes a comfort. The candle shivered. I leaned in, and then, my dear, I heard it again. Soft. A new voice. Nearer than a whisper. And older than a breath. "Mama, I wish I could tell you I broke the wall then. I did not. I did something smaller and braver. I took a piece of chalk from the nursery shelf and drew a line along the crack. Nothing. Then, under the line, because I am stubborn, and because the heart is an animal if treated as one, I drew a shape that had returned to me from nowhere in particular. A fox with a question mark tail. The chalk flaked, dusted the floor. I set the chalk down, and I waited, as if I had planted something and was rude enough to expect it to sprout before dawn. Minutes later, the chalk line moved. Not much. A smear as if brushed from the other side. My breath found my mouth and set. Up a camp there, smoking little curls of heat. "I am here," I said to plaster and paint. I put my palm to the wall. The wall was warmer now, as if it remembered. "My dear, I should say this before I go further. Shake your shoulders. Breathe with me for a moment. If you feel the prickle at your scalp, that is just your intuition waking. Stay with me, and, if you haven't yet, do subscribe and keep your hand in mine. I am going to show you a way through." There is more kindness in black nights than you think. The next day, while Edward rode into the village, and the clouds sank low, with the look of mended wool, I went to the library. There is a tower at Whitcomb House that no one uses, because it takes its time to get to any view worth seeing. In the tower are books too old for anyone except people who ask too many questions. I ran my finger along spines until I found one that wasn't aligned to the rest. It was a shabby blue with its title scraped clean. When I tried to pull it, it stuck. I tugged again. The panel beside the shelf shifted with a breath from behind. The sound of a centuries-old chest exhaling. Mrs. Gray had said there wasn't always a key to what men carry. Men, however, love to pretend they invented hiding. Women know better. I pressed the gap. It opened to a thin staircase, steep as a decision. The air rising from it had that quiet cold of closed-up places. I closed the door gently again, because this was not a thing to do in the morning, with bread rising in the kitchen and the laundry pining to be hung. There are some tasks you must appoint a night for. I waited. That is the cruelty of houses. They remind you how much there is of time. They do not care what you do with it. Edward took dinner in a silence that wanted applause. Agnes visited with violets that smelled like the secret corners of old parlours and left them on the mantel as if laying down a small assumption. He is being patient with you, she said. Be patient with him. I smiled at her in the way women smile at each other when there is not enough room for everything we could say. And at last, evening, the sea breathing slow, the gulls gone to their important sleep, the corridor holding its breath. I had put a blanket in the library the day before, and a bag with a candle and a scrap of bread, and the recklessness you need for opening a door. That has not been opened for a very long time. The sound of the panel shifting was softer this time, as if it too was tired. Up the stairs, one by one, counting in that small whisper we use when we want a thing not to feel alarmed, there were spider threads across the steps that had their own ideas. I brushed them with the back of my hand to keep good manners. The staircase gave to a narrow landing, and then another door, smaller than it had any right to be, with an iron latch. I put my ear to it. When a woman is in search of her child, there is nothing you can tell her about dignity. I heard a rustle. I heard a breath. I lifted the latch. No, wait. I'm getting ahead of the way the house wants me to tell it. You must understand something else first. There was a day months earlier when Edward took me down to the cellars to show me where the wine slept. It was a lesson. Men teach through inventory. Barrels, racks, dust, a small ledger with neat lines. He reached into a nook and pressed a brick, and a hidden compartment opened. He smiled, pleased with himself in the way kind men are when they want to impress their wives with the trick of their home. He pulled out a small wooden box, and from it something nested in velvet, a ring that had not been mine. My grandmother's, he said. For our daughter. He looked at me fiercely. His love all sharp corners. She will have the house in her pocket. He showed me that door because he wanted me to know the house had tricks. And because he wanted to be the one who knew them. He showed me because he wanted to fix me to him, not with tenderness, but with a compass. The trick, the cruel trick, is that I used it to fix myself to the house instead. I lifted the latch, and the door opened on that cold little furnace of air that comes when a space has been breathing quietly, without us for too long. The room was not a room. It was a passage, a priest hole, long as a held breath with a sliver of a window put low in the wall that looked out at nothing but a slit of tide. There was a cot, small, with a blanket like the blankets travellers push into their satchels and forget until a cold comes. There was a crate with a lid askew, and inside it, bottles and an old tin of condensed milk. There was a scrap of paper on the floor with marks that wanted to be drawings. More than all of this, there was a sound that moved through me, the small sleeping sound of a living child. I stood still because the world had tilted, and the only way to not slide off it was to become a part of the wall. Then I moved because the world had tilted, and the only way to right it was to step onto the new floor. "Hello," I said, and in that word, I put everything I had ever been and everything I was still owed. My love. The child did not wake. He slept in that uncompromised way children sleep when they believe in the safety of walls. I stepped nearer, and the light from my candle decided how much of him I could have. He was small, the smallness that is real smallness, and not just the way a mother sees. Dark hair like Edward, a mouth that almost frowned in sleep the way mine does, and his hands, oh, those hands, half curled, as if holding on to something I couldn't see. That's when I made the sound that a mother makes when she recognizes herself and everything she has ever feared. I reached. A figure moved in the dark corner, a shadow that stepped out of being just a shadow. A woman, thin as necessity, with hair braided tight against her head and eyes that had learned not to shine so that no one would notice them as eyes. I knew her. It took me longer than it should have. Anyone who has ever labored remembers the smell of the woman who tells you when to push. Mrs. Pritchard. Don't, she said, low and firm. He mustn't wake. I felt the world open under me and present me with a choice, fall into anger or climb into a different kind of survival. I did not shout. The house wouldn't have allowed it. I arranged my face the way one arranges a cloth over a birdcage in the early evening, gentle and final. You told me my son didn't draw breath, I said. He would not have. If not for me, she said evenly. He came blue. He came quiet. I coaxed him back despite him. I saved him, and the price of saving is not mine to set. Whose then? I asked, though the answer had already come, and sat down in my chest like a cold guest. His father's, she said. The candle gave a little sigh of itself. Wax ran down to my knuckles. I did not feel the heat, because of course, when a man believes love is obedience, and obedience is safety, and safety is the same as being the only one with the information. What does he do when the world gives him a wife who knows exactly the sound a wall makes when it knows your name? He steals what he can. He steals the future he cannot control. I looked down at my son. His lashes lay on his cheek like a promise. I watched his little chest move with a rhythm that introduced me to a part of the night I had never met. A small breath, another. In between, a pause, as if the world went away and came back just for him. What do you call him? I asked. Boy, said Mrs. Pritchard, and I had to put my hand to the wall to steady myself, because some absences are almost violent. His name, I said softly. It's a good place to start. We can't hold anything in the world without a name. She looked at me with a complicated mercy. You must go, she said. If you stay, everything that was hidden will be taken. If you leave, you may yet turn a man's certainty into sand. I came closer. Mrs. Pritchard did not move. I touched the blanket. The child shifted his mouth. A small dream of a thing. You and I whispered to him, share a wall. Go, said Mrs. Pritchard. We are watched. Women like me are always watched. I went back through the door like a woman walking backwards, off a cliff, and believing the air would memorize the shape of her body. I closed it. I leaned against it in the deep dark of the little landing, and for the first time since my son had been born or not born, I laughed. The smallest laugh. The kind you might mistake for a breath if you were not listening very closely. I had been broken into dust, and yet somehow I was still made of something the house could not sweep away. When I came down to the library, Edward was there. He sat in the green wing chair with a book open in his lap and his eyes on the page, so hard you could see the marks bleeding into his gaze. He lifted his head and the room turned its face to watch us. Where have you been? He asked, casual as a man, asking where the salt has gone. In my house, I said. He closed the book. He set it down with care. Come here, he said, and I did. Because sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is walk straight toward the thing she is about to undress with her questions. He took my hand, palm up. He traced the lines there with his thumb in the way of a man who had learned to be tender by rote. I have kept you safe, he said. You have kept me alone, I said. There is a difference. He put his hand to my cheek. A good hand. A strong hand. The hand that had held my head when I thought I would drown in pain. "Ruth," he said, "you know I love you." I stepped back. "No," I said, and the house liked the sound of it. "You love to be the one who knows. There is a difference." He stood, the way big men stand when they feel the ground buckling. He was not used to it. No one had taught him how to love a woman without owning the story. That is the pity of it. The tragedy is what he did because of it. He had stolen my happiness, thinking it could be kept in a room. He had underestimated me, and the house, and the way grief equips you with a kind of night vision. That evening he went to the village again, and I went to the nursery wall. I pressed my palm to it and felt the warmth like a pulse. "You will not keep me from my child," I whispered. "You will not keep him from his name." I drew the fox again, its tail curling into a question. I scratched a word under it with the chalk and let the dust fall onto the floor like snow. "Thomas," I wrote, because I liked that it means twin, because he and I had been born on the same hour, because I wanted a name that would look like itself, even when scrawled by a small hand. In the morning, the chalk word had smudged, and the smudge looked like a small attempt to write it back to me. Do you see how it happens? The haunting doesn't happen after death. It happens in these ordinary rebellions. A mother insists. A wall answers. A child sleeps in a room made by fear and wakes to find his name waiting like a coat, hung on a peg. Edward held me at the breakfast table, with conversation like a fence. He asked after the eggs, the accounts, the chimney sweep. I asked after the part of himself that had decided my heart was contraband. He did not answer. He buttered his toast. The morning light was yellow on the silver, all that old money gleaming, the way it does when nothing is comfortable. Agnes arrived and left us with a cake. Mrs. Gray watched us with her practical eyes and put a marmalade spoon within my reach. There is a moment when a secret begins to leak out of the corners of a room, when everything smells faintly of it. He felt it. I know he did. The way he looked at me, and quickly away, was a man learning he cannot keep up with the story he authored. That night, when the house folded itself into quiet, I waited beside the library panel and counted the beats of my heart as if measure could keep the fear from playing above its range. I went up the stairs with a candle, which is not a brave tool, exactly, but a faithful one. I lifted the latch. Behind the door, something had changed. The cot was empty, the blanket folded, the drawing on the floor gone. My hands shook in the dumb old panic that is made only of the length of time between breaths. "Mrs. Pritchard," I called. Soft. Nothing. "Thomas," I whispered into the thin seam of the wall, and something in the house shifted. The fireplace below exhaled. The corridor held its breath. I put my palm against the wood. From the far left, where the passage narrowed into a sliver the size of a hope, came the sound of footfalls and a small determined breath. I moved towards it. If this is where your own breath has gone shallow, my dear, rest your hand over your heart the way my mother taught me when thunder visited. Feel how it answers. If you would like me to go on, if you are with me here in the dark of Whitcomb House, walking toward the smallest sound, with the largest courage, tell me, and I will keep talking until I am hoarse. I moved toward it, counting, out of superstition, 1, 2, 3, as if a rhythm could keep the dark from noticing me. The passage narrowed, pinched like a throat about to swallow. My candle licked the damp and made it glisten, so the walls seemed to be holding their tongues. Another step, and there, a slip of movement, a hem, then a hand. Mrs. Pritchard emerged, with him bare against her shoulder, his small fist clamped around the braid that ran like a river down her back. Not a sound. She breathed, as if the air itself were fragile. He was awake. His eyes, dark as the cider left too long in barrels, found mine, and for a moment, I was unladylike and unalive, and anything but the animal that recognizes its young. I reached before I remembered the rules of reaching. He reached too. His hand opened into the sort of flower hands make when they are new to being hands at all, and his fingers brushed my chin. I made the kind of noise we make when the past and the future shake hands inside our chest. "Mama," he said, "if my heart were a man, it would have fallen to its knees." Mrs. Pritchard did not falter, did not soften, did not betray so much as a blink. She adjusted him as if he weighed nothing and everything. "I told you he mustn't wake," she said, but there was a slip in her voice now, a thread of something like apology or relief. "What do you plan to do?" I asked, low, not to frighten the word away. "What all women do," she said, "live between the orders we are given and the facts we must keep alive." I might have smiled if my mouth remembered how. "He knows me," I said, an astonishment I wore like a shawl. "How could he not?" She glanced at the wall. "You have been his weather." We stood there in that artery of the house, a midwife with a child she had pulled back from the far bank, and a woman who had been told by both, her husband and God, to forget. The tide breathed through the slit of a window. The candle talked to itself. "What does he eat?" I asked, because that is where love begins again, after it has been broken, at the mouth. "What I have and what is brought, and what we ask the house for," she said. "There are women who will look at me and not see. There are men who will write a ledger and not count." She met my eyes. "There is a man with money who pays me for a thing he cannot even say out loud to himself." "Edward," I said. The name felt like a pebble in my mouth, round and hard, and once smooth, now sharp. She nodded briefly. "Why?" The word rose up from some root the house had watered without me knowing. "Why this theatre? Why not tell me he doubts, or fears, or hates?" "She lost a child," she said after a moment, and I thought she meant me until she added, "his mother, in this house, before he had his first whisker." Sometimes men bury their tenderness when it dies the first time. Sometimes the burial is a habit they don't notice. And he thought to bury me with it, I said, not surprised at my own coldness. She shifted the boy to her other shoulder. He had begun to turn his head towards me, rooting, and I nearly swayed with the ache of it. "He thought to keep you," she said. "He thought to keep you from leaving with the child. He thought a lot of things that have very little to do with thinking." The floor murmured above us, the sound of footsteps far away, not ours. The house telling us that time existed somewhere else too. "I won't leave," I said, and the laugh that came next was unkind to myself. "Where would I go? This house is the only place I have left that understands me." She looked at me then, as if she were measuring how much I might be able to carry. "He intends to send the boy to his sister," she said, carefully. "Then say he was discovered alive at the Foundling Hospital. He intends to pity you then. He intends to be very good." I felt the old heat that had burned my letters curl up the back of my neck. "Agnes," I said, and the violets were suddenly a forest with thorns. "Does she know?" "Not yet," Mrs. Pritchard said. "She guesses something. Women always do. But she waits for someone to hand it to her on a plate with a proper name." "Thomas," I said, and when I spoke it near him, he looked, and his mouth did that nearly smile again that promised a life full of grief and feast both, because I have never known one without the other. "You must be careful," she said. "Careful as a habit, careful as a religion. He is a man of lists. He watches for wrinkles in the tablecloth. He will see any fold in you." "I will be heir," I said, and meant it as a vow. and a wall, and a sea, and whatever else you need me to be. Mrs. Pritchard shifted, alert in that small way people in dangerous work learn to be. Go, she said. We will be seen. Come when the house says come. She handed me something then, small and cold. A button with a fox engraved on it. Old and cheap and careful. He found it, she said. He keeps it. He puts it to the wall. I closed my fingers around it, and it felt like a heartbeat could carry. My little fox, I said to him. And it wasn't a nickname. It was a secret between us and the house. I backed away, as if approaching a miracle in reverse, and Mr. Pritchard's braid slid into the dark, like a line drawn on a map, to a place men hadn't learned to lie about yet. I closed the door, licked my finger, pinched out the candle, and let the absolute dark take on the shape of me. It didn't. It held. My dear, if you are holding your breath as I did, let it go now. The body cannot honor you if you do not honor it back. Before I continue, if this story has touched your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me. Your listening is the light in these rooms. And tell me, have you ever felt the house you live in choose you? I'd like to know. The day pretended to be a day. Bread rose. The post came. A rook complained at the sky, as if it were a clerk who had misfiled the blue. Edward walked from the study to the dining room. The way men walk when they think that movement itself is an accomplishment. I see him in my mind still, the perfect measured man, his hair parted by a comb. The world had carved in him at birth. I thought we might go to the sea this afternoon, he said, buttering his toast in small, precise strokes. The air is good for you. The air is good for me, I said, and kept my eyes on my tea. So is knowing the name of my child. His hand paused for a breath, then resumed its neatness. We agreed, he said, gently, as if gentleness were a discipline he longed to be given a gold star for. We would begin again. We did, I said. But your beginning was under the floorboards of my ending. I lifted my head. Where is he? He looked at me then, with something like mercy, and something like fear, and the awful worst thing, something like pity. Don't do this, he said. You don't know how far men will go when they are forced out of their rightness. I know how far women go when they are put in it, I said. Where is he? He waited so long. The clock tried to take on the weight of his silence, and nearly cracked. If you keep asking, he said at last, I will have to answer you. If I answer you, I will have to live with it. And if you don't, I asked. He folded his napkin. He placed it on his plate like the end of a letter. Then we will both be spared. Sparing me is the only sin you have committed that I cannot forgive, I said. He stood. It isn't a sin to save one's house, he said, a strangled nobility in him that would have been admirable if it were attached to anything as brave as truth. He left the room. I heard him move through the house. The sound of doors opening and closing, the light knock on the third stair. The house tracked him. So did I. I began to make my haunting. Not all hauntings require death. I had to become the kind of echo a living man fears most. The echo of his own intention. I planted myself in the house the way ivy does, slow at first, then everywhere. I moved his grandmother's ring from the velvet box in the cellars to the grate in his study where he had burned my letters, leaving it set upright in a little crown of ash. I knew the sight of it would travel through him like cold. When he found it, he inhaled sharply and set the ring back down, not where it belonged, but as if it would burn the box to carry it there. Later, when he'd gathered himself, he returned it to the velvet and found in its place a little chalk fox with its tail curled into a question. It was a very gentle kind of cruelty. He did not confront me. He began to close doors more carefully, unthreaded one curtain so that every time he drew it, it would fail to meet, and the thin line of outside would shame the inside by a hair's breadth. I whispered his name, only once, into the flue at night, and listened to the house try to keep my secret, as it always had, and fail by a whisper too. When he reached for his shaving mirror one morning, another face gazed back, the child's, drawn with my left hand and a blunt piece of charcoal in reverse, on the back of the glass, with all the sabotage of a woman taught to be right-handed. It was crude. It was unmistakable. He looked over his shoulder so hard you could hear it in the bones. And then he turned the mirror to the wall. He left the house and stayed out until after the lamps were lit, and came back tired and very kind. Kindness is so often the weapon of choice for men who are at war with their own souls. Agnes arrived again with violets that were beginning to wilt at the edges. "He is not himself," she said, settling onto the settee, as if setting was her job. "You've set something in motion, Ruth. I always knew you would. What do you think I've set?" I asked, because sometimes letting an onlooker narrate your own life for a moment buys you a breath. "Something old," she said, sniffing. "Old things are better at moving than young things. Everyone knows that." She looked at the corner where the wall met the ceiling in the nursery. "When I was a girl, my mother kept our baby brother in our room until he died. She did not tell us because she wanted us to be girls for as long as possible. We grew old in an afternoon when we found him. Forgiveness is harder when it has to make up for lost time. I would not have kept you a girl," I said. "No," she said, and the word inked itself into me. "You would have made me useful." "Help me," I said, and it surprised us both, the nakedness of it. "He will take the boy to you and call him a foundling, and pity me while you raise him with your violets." She looked at me with the first honest look since the day we met. "I would not raise your boy, Ruth," she said. "I would raise you both, if he would let me." Then softer, more human than she had ever been, with her hands folded in her lap, like a polite pair of birds. "He will not let me. He will not let anyone. He will only let the house. But the house is not a person, and you are." My throat hurt. "He doesn't know how to stop being right." "No," she said simply, "and it is a lonely place to be." That night, I went to the wall and drew a circle of chalk around the fox. Little hands on the other side smudged the edges until it looked like the moon. I sang under my breath the lullaby I had not realized I had learned in my own childhood, a small, sad, brave tune that walked down the scale and then up again, falteringly, like a child learning stairs. He answered with a sound as old as the first mouth that opened to answer a mother. I touched the wall with my forehead. You can call it prayer. I don't mind. Mrs. Gray began to move differently then, rearranging the kitchen as if for a gathering no one had announced. Bowls nearer to the door, flour in a smaller flour bin, bread in 2 smaller loaves instead of 1. I will never know how much she knew and how much the house had told her, and how much she guessed with the arithmetic of a woman who has lived, where silence has more furniture than the rooms. "Don't do anything today. You can't undo tomorrow," she said again, one morning as she slid a cup across the table to me. "And remember, men sleep. Do you see the shape of the plan forming? Men sleep. Houses have holes. Children learn names. Women press their ears to walls and make more of them. No one wrote it down. It wrote itself in us like a soft bruise that remembers." I wrote a letter to Christopher that evening. I did not send it. I folded it into 4 and placed it in the mouth of the fox, carved into the newel post. A little joke between the house and me. I told him I was living. I told him about the lullaby and the way grief teaches you to see in the dark, and how the boy's hand had felt on my chin, light as permission. I told him I forgave myself for the letters he had written to me, and for the ones I had kept, and for the way my heart had learned to read in 2 languages at once, the way it can love 2 men for what they are, and still choose the one it has, no safety in choosing it all. I dreamed that night that the fox took the letter and trotted down the path to the village, with his tail pointing to a question no one had thought to ask. When I woke, the letter was gone. The newel post held only the smooth, familiar shine of so many hands, and the house smelled faintly of wet wool and rain. The next day, the postman knocked twice, the cheerful knock that belongs to the living. I opened the door and he handed me a single envelope, thin and unafraid. I did not need to read it to know it was what I had dreamed. The fox has his ways. I put the letter in the drawer with the marmalade spoons, because that is where hope belongs. Near sweet things you have to scrape at. My dear, I whispered into the flue that night, as if speaking to the wide sky could carry a whisper too, just the right pair of ears. Tell me, have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart? I am learning how. Place your answer in the space between your breaths. I will hear it. The haunting took root. Edward grew careful about the stairs, stepping over that little catch, as if it were the line between a lie and a prayer. He began to check the latches twice. He took to wearing the ring in his pocket and touching it in the way of a man who needs to hold the story together with his fingers. He also began, for the first time, to notice the child he had made. The house made sure of it. Late in the afternoon, when the light fell through the nursery window, brittle as spun sugar, a small hand shadow would pass across the boards in his study below. He would glance up, startled, then look at the ceiling as if he could will it to become honest. A toy would appear on his desk, an ivory rattle set, just so at the edge where his ledger opened to the week that he had paid Mrs. Pritchard in tidy columns. He would clear his throat and put the rattle back on the mantelpiece in the nursery, with more care than he put to any other task in his day. We lived like that, menacingly gentle, for weeks. In that kind of time, a person can convince herself that the world has settled, that the furniture has agreed not to be moved again. It is a lie, kindness tells you, so you can make soup and cleanse sheets and kiss the air of a house without flinching. The night it broke, there was a knocking I did not know. Not the tap-pause tap of the wall, not the scurry of mice making bargains, not the long dragging push of the wind's shoulder. A knock that wanted to be heard. 3 hard knocks to the front door, and then again. Agnes's knock is a fluttering. This was a demand. Mrs. Gray was in the kitchen. I reached the door first. When I opened it, the night pressed its cold mouth against my face, and behind it, a man. He wore his hat in his hands. He looked tired the way men look when they have travelled through a story they thought they were too clever to belong to. "Christopher," I said. He did not smile like a man in a scene in a book. He looked at me the way a man looks at a person he loves when he is trying not to make her a project. He glanced at the stairs, at the shadowed hallway, at the very particular way Whitcomb House looks like a house that is proud of itself and still ashamed. "I'm sorry," he said, as if he had broken a cup I loved. "Your letter." "Of course," I said, and because there are people listening, there are secrets that must put their hats back on. "Come in." He did, and the house took his measure and allowed him to stay. I led him into the little parlour that I preferred, because it did not always pretend to be brave. He sat and took off his gloves, even though it was too cold to make a habit of that. He set them in his lap. "Ruth," he said, and the way he said my name made a space open up in the world where something kinder could stand. "I would not have come if I didn't think you had left me a road to walk." He glanced at the mantel, where Agnes's violets had given up the business of pretending to be alive. "I did not come to take anything. You came to give me back my name, I said. He nodded. What can I be for you? A witness, I said. I did not touch him. I did not reach the way an earlier part of me would have reached. There. Ways a woman can be faithful that no one writes songs about. We heard the carriage wheels then. The particular scrape of Whitcomb gravel under the weight of decision. Edward. He entered the room, with his eyes already narrowed against a violence. He had not yet decided whether to perform. He saw Christopher and looked without blinking, the way a man looks at a bird he intends to pretend is not in the room. Evening, he said. Edward, Christopher said, and the civility between them was a fabric stretched taut over a hole. Ruth, Edward said, and I turned to him and let him see all of me, the grief, the stubbornness, the love he would not be given any more. Who is your guest? A friend, I said. The kind who walked when I asked. We do not receive in the evenings, he said. It was a small sentence with a large keyring attached. We do now, I said. Silence is the strangest furniture. It sits between people and dares them to go around it. Edward walked around it and stood by the mantel the way men stand when they want to look like portraits. The clock made a valiant effort. It ticked. I suppose, he said, and then stopped, because the scene did not yet know which mood it wished to be. I suppose you are here because my wife has been writing letters. I am here because your house delivered me a fox, Christopher said, with a kind of dignity I will always bless him for. I am here because I can be quiet in a room, he added softer. Edward looked at me with that old pity and that old fear. Ruth, do you know what your sister said? I said. She said she would raise us both if you let her. He flinched as if I had slapped his better self. I am doing what is best, he said, and he believed it. God help him. He believed it. For whom? I asked. He looked at Christopher then, and I saw his eyes sharpen into the kind of clarity men reserve for enemies. You would take her, he said, which hurt, because he made me into an object, and because I had once made myself into one too. I will not permit it. Christopher shook his head. I am not here to take, he said again. I am here to witness. If you are not doing wrong, you will not mind being seen. The word landed. Wrong. It smelled like old milk and the sea after a storm. Edward walked closer to me, close enough that I could see the flecks of light in his eyes that made him look so kind in daylight. What do you want from me? He asked. And there it was, the smallest door opening to the smallest room. He asked. The truth, I said. My son, his name in your mouth. And the door opened. He stepped back. No, he said, and his face became a stranger's. No, I will not be made a fool. I will not be blackmailed by grief. I will not. He broke off, not because the speech had ended, but because the house had decided to intrude. A sound came from above us, the unmistakable spill of a small laugh, making its way through wood. Then, as if directed by the conductor of this house's orchestra, the ivory rattle rolled off the mantel and fell with a sound that had to be listened to be heard for what it was. A child announcing himself. Edward closed his eyes. He wanted to open them on a house that had learned to be obedient. He opened them on us. I am sending him away tonight, he said, and I loved him and hated him, and confessed both in the quiet way a woman holds herself upright in a storm. I am sending him away to a place where you will never find him. Christopher stood in a bravery I had not asked for. You will not, he said, and there was more steel in him than anyone had taught him to expect. He is my son, Edward said. He is my son, I said, and stepped so the two men in the house all had to learn what it was to look at a mother who remembered her name. Another sound then, and the scene shifted in a way only houses with age and patience can shift it. A door somewhere above. A foot on the wrong stair. A woman, Mrs. Pritchard, moving faster than caution approves of. Edward turned. He is, after all, a man of lists. He will always count the steps between himself and the thing that will ruin the inventory. He went to the library and I heard the panel sigh. He went to the stairs that go not up, but away. He went down into that narrow passage where a child was laughing because his mother had taught the wall to be a game. I followed. Of course I followed. Do you hear me? I said to Christopher. To the house. To anyone who waits too long to speak. Stay, witness. He stayed. If you are with me here, hand to the cool of the wall, breath small and fierce, know this. There will always come a night when someone decides to move a child, like furniture. There must also come a woman who has learned the sound of the house and decided that her voice can be bigger than the corridor. That is the woman I decided to be, as the panel shut behind me, and the dark took the shapes of those of us who did not fit in the stories men had allowed. The passage air closed around my face. Ahead of me, Edward's steps were careful, but quick. I took my shoes off and followed like a ghost that had learned to keep to the edges. Mrs. Pritchard had moved the cot. She had tucked the blanket into the strap of a bag. She stood just beyond the next bend. Her braid a dark arrow. In her arms, my boy. He did not cry. Some children are wise. He is one of them. He looked at the blade of light that fell across the floor as the panel above shifted to admit Edward's weight, and he did not flinch. He has my stubbornness. He has his father's belief that moving seems like victory. Give him to me, Edward said. No, said Mrs. Pritchard. He went past her anyway, to the door at the end where the passage opens, not to daylight, but to the small covered coach house, because old houses always have a way to travel without being seen. He reached for the latch and then stopped because I said his name, the way maybe his mother once said it when he was small and thought the world was manageable. Edward. He turned. Look, I said, and lifted the candle. In its light, you could see what the house looks like when it has decided to take sides. Chalk on the wall, a fox everywhere, little half-moons made by a small fingernail learning to scratch, a blot, milk, ink, shaped like a country no one has named properly yet. The house was a ledger too, only no one had taught him to read it. This is not mercy, I said. This is theft. You have stolen my happiness, but I will be your haunting until you learn to put it back. The candle threw our moving shadows up, in tall versions of ourselves. Edward's shadow looked like his father's, which I had never seen. Mine looked like my mother's, which I vaguely remembered standing against the kitchen light, stirring and never stopping, even when she ought to have. Mrs. Pritchard's looked like every woman who has stood between a man and a child, when the law was wrong. The boy's shadow was small and brave on the wall. He reached his hand toward it and laughed his right here laugh. Ruth, Edward said. And when he said my name this time, it was not a demand. It was a confession. Say his, I said. There are moments the heart recognizes as doors. He stood. At one. He could have put his hand on the latch and opened it. He could have said it. He did not. Not yet, boy, he said, weakly. And it nearly broke him to hear how stupid it sounded, stacked up against the way the house was saying us. I shook my head. You will not speak to your son the way men speak to livestock. Silence. Then, from the little body that did not know he was changing the world with his mouth, Ta, he said, the first half of the name like a small hammer. He patted the wall. Thomas, I said, and the house seemed pleased with the sound of it again. Edward closed his eyes, as if I had opened his chest and rearranged his organs for him in a way he was not quite ready for. Then he reached a good hand, a guilty hand, a scared hand, and for a moment I thought he would take the child and walk down the passage until he fell out of the house into a night that would not make him answer for anything. But his hand did not go to the boy. It went to the wall. He touched the chalk fox, and when he lifted his fingers, they were white. "Ruth," he said again. And then, "Oh, my dear, here is where we stepped into the part of the story no one likes to tell. The place where a man who has loved you poorly finds that he is still a man with habits, and the habit of control is the last one to go." He pushed past us. He opened the coach house door. A shape waited there. A man with a cap pulled low, the smell of horse, and the musty quiet of a plan. "Ready," Edward said. "No," I said, and I wasn't speaking to the driver. I was speaking to the house. Do you know the sound old iron makes when it decides it prefers to be memory instead of hinge? Whitcomb House knows it. The latch that had been used too seldom in too few generations found its old age at precisely the moment I asked. It refused to lift. "Open," Edward said to it. To me, to the world. Mrs. Pritchard moved. "Go," she said to him. But she meant me. "Take the upper stairs, the other door, the one he has never found, because he thinks he has looked everywhere." She shoved the child at me, that small, warm, impossible future, and I took him with my old brand new arms and did not look back at the man whose house had finally remembered it was mine. I ran, not the way the young run, headlong and drunk, but the way a mother runs, careful with the cargo, reckless with anything that isn't the child, up the tight stair, into the soft cold of the panel that opens behind the nursery wardrobe, out into the room where the wallpaper ships are not going anywhere at all. The cradle stood open, a mouth waiting. I did not put him in it. I held him, and he held my braid the way he had held Mrs. Pritchard's. And I cried that sound that is not very pretty, that women make when they have become animals again on purpose. Below, footsteps. Above, the little quiet of the roof learnings. Snow. In the corridor, the sound of Christopher's voice, not raised, saying something like a prayer, but made of plain words. "I am here," he said. "I see you." I turned, the boy against me, and there in the doorway stood Agnes, her hand on the frame, her violets a bruised shape in her basket. She looked at me holding my son. I watched it pass over her face. The calculation, the resentment, the relief, the long old ache she carried like a coin in her pocket. "Thomas," I said, "because names are the easiest bridges. Your aunt," she made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a grief. "Oh," she said, "you are here." She put the basket down, and the violets tipped their little faces, as if listening. "What will you do?" she asked me, like a woman who had been waiting a long time to be asked herself. "Haunt him," I said, breathing the boy's hair, as if it could keep me alive into the next minute. "Until he learns to live." Agnes nodded. "Let me help," she said. "And that is where I will leave you for this breath, my dear. On the edge of a night when a house learns its own mind, on the turn of a latch, on the first time a man is seen by all the eyes that will no longer agree to be closed. If you are with me still, touch the closest wall. Tell it your name. Houses remember such things. If you wish me to go on, if your heart is asking what we did next, stay. I owe you the rest, and I will give it." Agnes stepped into the room, closed the door softly, as if even the latch might tattle. She looked at Thomas, at the braid he had learned to hold, and then at me. What passed between us then had no ceremony, but was sacred all the same. A woman giving another woman her shoulder, in a house that had taken too many. "We will tell the truth," she said. but we will choose where it stands. I nodded, pressed my cheek to Thomas's hair. He smelled like bread left to rise. Below, a scuffle, the kind the house made when men tried to outwit its angles. Edward at the coach house latch. Mrs. Pritchard's body in the way that only women move when they have promised a child a future. We gather him, Agnes said, in the hall, not to shame him. He'll turn like a knife if you shame him, but to make him seen. She met my eyes. Do you trust me to hold him still with kindness while you ask him to speak? I trust you to bruise me less than any other woman alive, I said, and her mouth twitched. Violets always look like they know a secret. Agnes has the same expression. We moved like conspirators in a poem. Mrs. Gray appeared without appearing, placing a cloth across my shoulders and a cup of sugared tea into my hand, as if she'd known the temperature of my blood by the echo of my footfall. He's gone round the back, she murmured. The latch held. Old iron remembers who built it. Then, eyeing Thomas with that practical affection she kept in a drawer where no one could use it against her. Introduce him to his house then. Chairs, tables, the place where the floor creaks so he can learn the rhythms he will inherit. My dear, I whispered, leaning toward you for a breath. If you're with me and your heart is tighter than it likes, share the tension with me. And if you want to keep walking inside this night, do subscribe and stay. I promise to set you down, gently on the other side. We went to the hall, not the big, important one with portraits and a chandelier that hangs like the memory of money, but the long, narrow one where the light from the front door reaches and then gives up halfway. Agnes sent for Christopher with a note written in her plain, unapologetic hand. Come if you can be quiet. Mrs. Gray fetched Mrs. Pritchard in a way that looked like fetching onions. We arranged ourselves like a family might. If we had ever learned how. Agnes at the far end with her violets. Mrs. Gray near the kitchen door. A sentry with a spoon. Mrs. Pritchard halfway between shadow and light. Christopher in the chair nearest. The corridor so he could see and be seen and not see at all, if that's what the men needed. I stood in the middle with Thomas on my hip. He had fallen asleep, the kind of sleep that trusts a moving body. The house inhaled. The door opened. Edward stepped in with the look of a man who has been refused by iron and is now searching for a softer thing to command. He took in the scene. He took in the faces. I watched the arithmetic he had learned falter. The sum would not behave. What is this? He asked. A gentler man would have said who. Your house, Agnes said. Your wife, your son, your sister, your women, your witness. She tilted her head toward Christopher without granting him too much dignity in Edward's story. Your life. He looked at me last, as if saving me would make me easier. I handed him the opposite of what he expected. Say his name, I said, and even my breath was still. He stared at the child, as if seeing a word written in a language he once knew and had let rust. Behind his shoulder, the fox carved at the newel post watched with its sly patience. Edward opened his mouth, and nothing came. The way sometimes in a dream, you try to shout and discover that your voice has decided you are on your own. I will not be made a spectacle, he said at last. Then be made right, Agnes said, and the softness in her voice was as sharp as anything I'd heard. It is a smaller theatre. He looked at her, at the violets, at the place on the stair that knocked twice. You do not understand, he said, and there it was again. That old entitlement disguised as protection. The posture of men who grew up in rooms where women were kept at the edges like decent furniture. Help me, I said, and he blinked because I had never asked him that directly. Help me find the way we live with this. He stepped forward to reach, not for me, and I was glad of that. But for the hand of the sleeping boy, his fingers hovered above the small knuckles, as if the space between them might shock him. He looked up. "I will not say a thing I cannot keep," he said, and the kindness of it hurt. "Then keep it," I said. "Keep him." Something in him faltered, as if its hip had given out. The house, which had learned everything about the history of men failing and mending, made a small encouraging noise. One of the stairs popped in its old way. He flinched. He lifted his eyes to the ceiling and then brought them back down to me, like a man learning that the help he needs is shorter than the prayer he is willing to speak. "My dear," I said, turning my voice to you and holding it there for a second, "tell me, have you ever asked for the truth and had to wait while love learned to pronounce it? I'm listening for you in these spaces." "I was not this before," Edward said suddenly, like a confession had slipped the leash. "Something happened in this house when I was small." He looked, not at me, not at Agnes, but at Mrs. Gray. "Tell it," he said to her, and I watched. The older woman take the air into her lungs, like a person about to dive. It turns out the story was so old, it had made itself into wallpaper. Edward's father, a drinker with hands that were languages unto themselves. His mother, quick with tidiness, slow with mercy. Lionel, the elder, bright as spilled milk. Agnes already a little hard around the edges to protect the soft inside no one asked after. One afternoon by the river, Lionel in the shallows with his pockets full of stones, meant to be a fort. Edward turned when he heard his father's voice. A single mistake, the kind a child survives unless the world was waiting for an excuse. Lionel slipped. He did not drown because he could not swim. He drowned because he could not say help fast. Enough for adults who measured the day by their disappointments. The father hit Edward for the sin of being the child who survived in view. The mother took Edward to the priest hole and pressed him into the dark and told him, "Silence is the difference between losing what we have and losing everything." She kept him there through whole nights until the fear became so familiar. It looked like a friend. He learned to love the woman who hid him by learning to love the hiding. He learned to prove his love by making the world small enough to keep in a pocket. I looked at him then with a different kind of cruelty, the kind that is mercy in a dress men mistake for blame. "And you hid my child because you thought love was a room," I said. "You told yourself it was to save the house. You told yourself it was to spare me. You told yourself every story except the true one. You were terrified that love was larger than your control." He did not argue. He did not offer the house. He dropped his eyes to the floor in a way that rearranged the room without moving a chair. When he looked back up, the man who wanted to be right had stepped to the side. The boy who had been wronged stood there without a suit on. "Thomas," he said, and the name sounded exactly like a door, unlatched by the right hand. The house exhaled with us. The portrait of his grandmother shifted in its frame. Only a whisper of a movement, the kind old houses make when they are pleased to be asked. Thomas startled in his sleep, as if the air itself had given him his name to hold. He opened his eyes, and they were unafraid. He looked at Edward and made the kind of shape with his mouth that makes men reconsider their gods. Edward reached again. No flinch, no hover. He touched the soft fist, and his face went strange and bare, the way faces look when they stop telling you what to see and show you what they have been. He began to cry. Not manly tears, not proud ones. He made the sound a person makes when a memory has been forgiven, without being erased. "I am sorry," he said to me, and every sheet in the house lifted as if the apology were a breeze. "I stole your happiness. I believed I could put it somewhere safe and manage it. I cannot manage it. I can only be haunted by it until I learn to let it stay. I accept your haunting, I said, and I offer you mine. We did not blow out the candle on our marriage and set it smoking. We cupped our hands around the flame and wept into it until it learned to be steadier. That night we slept, not in shifts of suspicion, but in something like truce. He did not ask where the passages began and ended. I did not show him the chalk. He lay on his back, and I lay on my side, with Thomas in a basket under my hand. The way an ocean keeps track of a boat, the house hummed the smallest tune, like an old woman tidying a shelf under her breath. In the morning, we set about the work of making the truth official. Agnes wrote to the vicar in ink that partnered with No Nonsense. A matter of naming, she called it, and the vicar, who loved his job more than his furniture, arrived with the baptistry book and an expression that knew everything without requiring gossip as dessert. Mrs. Pritchard stood with her hands folded in the way women do when they have been brave and expect to be punished for it. Mrs. Gray dressed the table with a cloth usually reserved for Sundays and berths that did not need lies. We stood in the small chapel off the library, a room I had never liked for its smell of varnish until it learned Thomas's breath. Edward held our son. His hands did not shake. He did not break. The vicar dipped his fingers into cold water and made the sign of a cross on a brow new to touching. Who gives this child his name? He asked. We do, Edward said, looking at me the way a man looks when a map has finally shown him that two roads meet. Thomas Whitcomb. We wrote it down. We wrote it in the book, in the house, in the air. We wrote it on the inside of our tongues, so it would never again be hard to say. The fox carved into the newel post. Oh, that old trickster, tilted its wooden head in the light and looked briefly like it was grinning. My dear, if you are still with me, if your ribs feel less tight now, place your hand on your own name, somewhere in your body. Let it know you're keeping it. And if you can, do subscribe and keep my company on evenings like this. I am old, and stories are warmer when they sit close to other breathing souls. Now, understand this. Mercy is not a spell, it is a work. For a while, Edward tried to make of our forgiveness a full stop, but houses and women prefer commas. He woke in the night more than once, with my name in his mouth. The way men wake with the taste of a dream, he started to keep doors open without thinking of it as surrender. He started to sit on the step, where the stair knocks twice, and listen to the sound it makes when people return. He touched the fox button in his pocket, Thomas's fox, and did not flinch at the chalk on his fingers. We told the village. We did not drag it into the square. We did not apologize to people who had no title to our tears. We walked to church with Thomas between us, and we were seen. The seamstresses, who liked to look like they were not looking, looked. The men with news folded into their hats, nodded as if they had known nothing and everything. Agnes walked beside me, not as a sentinel or as an enemy, but as a sister. After, she took me to her cottage and put a violet into Thomas's grip. For your cousin, she said, and I saw it in her, the child she had lost, the baby they had taken from her belly, to save a family's name and ruin her heart. She cried, and I took her wrists, because a woman is allowed to find a piece of the railing when the sea is bigger than sense. His name was Wilf, she said into my shoulder. I have said it to no one for 20 years. Wilf, I said, and the house in that moment, though it could not hear us, later creaked with a satisfaction that might have been the sound of all the unspoken finally filing themselves where they belonged. Mrs. Pritchard stayed. She did not gather her braid and leave in the night with her fear coin purse clutched under her ribs. She moved into the room off the nursery and became what she had been in secret, a nurse. She taught me how Thomas liked to be held when his stomach misread the hour. She showed me how to bind the fever out of a night with cloths and patience. She stood at the end of the hall when Edward walked past and nodded. Not as a co-conspirator, but as a colleague. We never spoke of the night in the passage, or of the price Edward had paid her to break me. She kept the money. She kept her dignity. She gave both to the child. Christopher left the day after the christening. He did it the way he has always done hard things, with the quiet of someone who believes in the mercy of leaving the least scar possible. He came to the back door, not the front. He handed me a letter. He did not hold my eyes as if to steal something. He held them the way people hold their candles, walking in a wind, present, careful, resolved. "I love you," he said, and the sentence did not tremble. I loved who we were and what we were fodder for. I love who you are when you are nowhere near me. The house is your life. Go on haunting it until it remembers everything. He paused. You never needed me to save you, Ruth. You needed me to witness. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for walking toward me when I asked, I said. You have been my reminder that a good man doesn't always want to be right. He wants to be true. We did not kiss. We did not try to make a moment into a book. He put the letter in my hand and the fox button in Thomas's. Then he walked down the path, and though he did not turn, the house watched him go and forgave him for loving me, as if it were a weather he could predict. The letter is still in the drawer with the marmalade spoons. Sometimes, when the night is heavy with rain and memory, and I am missing my old laugh, I take it out and read the part that feels like a prayer. He was brave enough to write down, "May your house grow used to the sound of your happiness, so it needn't knock to be let in." Time didn't leap. It tripped. It limped. It slept in. Thomas learned to walk along the corridor, hand to the wall, the way little men learn to negotiate with the air. He learned to laugh at the stairs' little knock. He learned to say Gray for Mrs. Gray, and Ness for Agnes, and Pitch for Pritchard, and then Papa. And when he said it in the library, Edward looked at the flue and whispered "thank you" into the soot. The house taught me 1,000 ways to use my hands that were not breaking. I cooked in the kitchen that had once been a place to hide. I spoke the names of our dead without asking permission or brushing my teeth first. The fox on the newel post grew shiny with the touch of a boy who knew he was permitted to ask questions. And Edward, this is perhaps the strangest part of the haunting, began to move through the rooms as if he'd been invited. He sat with us more than he sat with his ledgers. He left the coach house door open on warm days like an apology to the iron. He listened when Agnes spoke, and though they argued, some families are built over fireplaces. There will always be sparks. He did not go to war. He kept the ring in the box. But sometimes, when the light was tolerable, he wore it. He named the rooms. He let one of the rooms be mine. He could not give me back the hours I had walked beside a wall, hoping for a hand pressed back. He could not reverse the smoke in the study or the lies he converted to mercy and tried to feed me with a spoon. He could make a new, honest place for our life. That is a thing a man can do. He did it. We had another child. The sort of sentence that is always surprising when said without frill. A girl. We named her Mercy, not to taunt the past, but to be kind to the future. Mercy, who grows like a vine of laughter along the rail, and will not be told a secret if it isn't hers to hold. When she was very small, she drew with chalk on the nursery wall with Thomas, and they made a galaxy. I stood with my hands messy and wept against the fine dust, because somewhere deep in me, the young woman who had been told she should try to be spared examined the universe made by her children and decided sparing is for breakable things, and we were made to be used well. When Thomas was 6, the sea took a man from the village and returned him a day later with his pockets full of stones he had not put there. I saw Edward stand by the window, mouth moving around the names of the river, and the summer and Lionel, and I watched him not go to the study to hide in numbers. He went to Agnes, and they said Wilf out loud in the yard. Thomas stood with his fox button and his hands like birds that couldn't decide which direction was wiser. We grieved like culture, and like family, and like a house. We didn't pretend to be spared. Years are a string. I am old enough to tie knots in them and call them beads. I have made you this necklace of a story not because Whitcomb House wants to be famous or because I want to paint myself glorious in your eyes, but because the world never runs out of ways to turn love into fear and women into furniture, because someone will be told tonight that it is merciful to be kept from her own door, because a boy will be hidden in a dark space and taught to call it safety, because a house somewhere is learning how to say the name of a woman in the middle of the night and is afraid of it. He stole my happiness. He took it and put it in a passage and hired a woman to stand between it and my body. He told himself he was sparing me, and he told me I was spared, and he told the house to keep its mouth shut. But I became his haunting, not the cruel kind, the kind that presses a palm to the wall and waits and whispers and does not leave, the kind that moves a ring and draws a fox and sets the mirror at a slant, the kind that loves without obeying and forgives without forgetting and is willing to sing a lullaby into a flue for years. If that is what it takes to pull a mouth back from the edges of silence, he died some winters ago, the slow kind of dying that looks like a long nap from a distance. On the last day, he asked for the study, but could not get up the stairs. We put him on the sofa in the room that had forgiven him the most often. He asked for Thomas and Mercy and Agnes and Mrs. Gray and even Mrs. Pritchard, who had gone soft around the jaw, but sharp around the eyes, in the satisfying way women do when they've bet correctly on their own endurance. He took my hand the way a young man takes a hand and pressed his cheek into it, the way a small boy does. Say it, I whispered, because it mattered even then. He smiled. Thomas, he said. Ruth. He added the last, like a finishing nail in a good house. If I haunt him now, it is not in the way you think. He haunts me too, with the gentleness he learned too late, and the way his eyes went soft when our daughter laughed. I walk the corridor at 3 a.m. Some habits do not ask permission to stay, and the house hums my name back to me without scaring me. Sometimes I press my old palm to the wall for the thrill of it and feel nothing but plaster and paint and heat. Other nights, I feel a little pressure from the other side. Thomas's children, playing fox, or the past finding a comfortable chair. My dear, before I put this away, tell me this in your heart. Have you ever become someone's haunting and refused to be their ghost? Did you learn to move through a house until it knew you would not go, even if the doors would prefer you did? If you wish to tell me, I will listen. The comments are more than a place for words. They are a place for women and men who need to be witnessed. Subscribe if you can bear to. I have more rooms to open for you, more names to hand back to the mouths that dropped them. Thomas married a woman with a laugh like shoes on tile. Mercy lives in the village with a man who bakes bread and is not afraid to knead dough the way grief should be kneaded, with the heel of the hand and a little water. Agnes died with violets on her windowsill and Wilf in her mouth, her last word. Brave as any soldiers. Mrs. Gray was buried with the spoon she used to point at danger. Mrs. Pritchard was put into the ground with a nurse's cap she never wore because titles are silly and necessary both. Christopher wrote me once every Christmas until my eyes decided letters were too small. And then he sent violets by way of a fox-faced child who winked at the newel post as though in on a joke. No one else could see. If you ever come to Whitcomb House, you might be disappointed. Houses look smaller in person than they do in stories because only the walls are counted, not the rooms our voices make. But if you run your finger along the edge of the library shelf, one shabby blue book will tug back at you. And if you go up the thin staircase and find the narrow landing, there is a door you cannot open because we have nailed it shut. It is not for secrets anymore. It is for remembering. The plaster around it is smooth. The chalk has been cleaned. We do not need foxes to find each other now, but once in a while, when my bones ache and the night tells me I am both old and alive, I take a stub of chalk and draw a small curl of a tail near the skirting board, just to keep the house humble, just to tell it I am listening. I will tell you one last thing. After Edward said Thomas, after the village saw us, after we learned how to drink tea without thinking of smoke, I took the ash from the study where my letters had burned, and I mixed it with water and painted a little mark inside the cradle where no one would see but me. A fox. Yes, of course. But also a word. Begin. Because we did, every day, in that house that once insisted on end. If you stayed with me till the end, my dear, thank you. Tell me the time and country you're watching from in the comments. It warms my old heart knowing where my stories travel.